Hey everyone, Michael here with Offshore Citizen. We are here in the coast of Bulgaria near Varna. Wonderful place. You can check out Villa Chinka if you want to go and check it out. Anyway, I am going to talk to you today about the subject of using international trusts for international tax planning, or using trust for international tax planning. This is something that in a lot of the world they don't really understand very well. In part, they don't have trust laws. We've talked before a little bit about asset protection trusts, and today we're going to talk about how they apply to tax planning. So here's the bottom line. You can go back and watch some of our other videos if you haven't already. Like and subscribe to the channel. Check back. There's some stuff I've talked about what is a trust, how does it work, etc. But the fundamental piece is that it separates benefit from ownership. Why is this super important? This is super important because in the modern day, what I always talk to people about is there's kind of the three pillars of residency. There is the residency of the company, right, which is based usually on the management control, but also with a place of registration. Second of all, there's the residency of the income. And the third is the residency of the shareholders, and how the residency of the shareholders factors into it is primarily in terms of the CFC rules. Now, a bunch of countries don't have CFC rules, so if they don't, you're in a good situation. But if you do have CFC rules, increasingly they are difficult to get around, okay? So what trusts allow you to do is to do this thing where you separate the benefit and the ownership of an asset, okay? Why is this important? Well, potentially it can mean that the CFC rules don't apply. Now, be very aware, there's a lot of rules pertaining to how exactly trusts are handled and taxed in different parts of the world. Again, in parts of the world where they don't have trusts, there's less of these. So for instance, we could contrast the US and Spain, right? The US has very sophisticated reporting rules, etc. for trusts. Spain does not, because it's a civil law jurisdiction, does not have much governance on it. And that creates possibilities, but it also creates ambiguity, okay? So you need to look at both sides of it. So what happens here? Well, the idea is, let's say that you don't form a company. Say a company is formed for you by some sort of a nominee and put into trust, okay? Now, if that's the case, so you have normally these rules, you have a settlor, you have a protector, settlor can also be called a grantor, you have beneficiaries, you have a trustee. So the trustee will be a person who is outside of the jurisdiction that we're concerned about the CFC rules, okay? Also, the trust itself will be outside, and of course, the company is still going to be taxed based on its residency and based on its source income, so those things are all part. But this is also useful for assets such as real estate, potentially such as stocks, whatever else, right? Now, when that asset goes into trust, you want it not to be attributable to the beneficiary, okay? This is very important. So generally speaking, you would set it up so that you had some sort of relationship with the trust as an investment advisor, potentially as a protector, or possibly as a beneficiary. That's usually what's going to happen. And the idea is to remove yourself from the role of trustee, so you don't have the management control influence, right? And not be related in terms of the settlor. Now, there's also really important conditions, and again, this varies country to country based on the local rules, but the conditions for the relationship with the beneficiaries is very important. In most cases, you can kind of think about the basic logic that works this way, okay? So in a trust, eventually the assets will go to the beneficiary or beneficiaries. But if there are multiple beneficiaries, then it's discretionary, right? Meaning that it's not like, okay, when this person turns 18, they get 50% of the trust assets, and when the other person turns 21, they get 20%, and somebody else, So long as it's a discretionary trust in terms of the distribution, and so long as there are multiple beneficiaries, it's very difficult to make the argument of whose assets those are, because any given beneficiary may not get those assets, okay? This is a very important part of some trust tax planning, okay? So again, what I'm giving you here is kind of like broad strokes to kind of explain the concept, but it's very, very important in these cases that you dive deep into the local rules, that you understand the rules of all the jurisdictions. So the jurisdiction of administration, of registration, of adjudication, of the beneficiaries, of the settlers, of the trustees, etc., etc., etc. Okay, there's a lot of rules you want to pay attention to here. And so it's very complex, but what's useful about it is potentially it allows you to build a structure which is not going to be subject to tax the same way it would in really any other case, at least until there's a distribution from the trust. And again, sometimes they're going to tax it when there's a distribution, sometimes there's not. In some cases, there's a question of, okay, do the assets transfer from the settlor to the beneficiary when they're distributed, beforehand, etc. And this really depends, again, on how the country treats it. So for instance, Spain has some specific, because Spain will disregard the trust, okay? So they're gonna say, okay, when does the transfer take place? And you wanna make sure that the transfer takes place only at the end when you're ultimately gonna be subject to tax, and this allows deferral. It allows you to protect, say, in the instance that you're gonna go and move into another country, right? So a common case here might be pre-immigration tax planning, right? You may say, okay, I'm gonna be moving over here. I don't want my assets to be subject to taxation when I move. So in advance, I'm gonna set up a proper type of trust. That trust then is gonna hold the assets and invest them. And at some point in the future, either I'll leave and then I'll be able to realize the assets, or I'll be able to realize the assets through some sort of a distribution, which can then be structured to be as efficient as possible. And I've talked before about the significance of deferral, okay? So all right, let's go back to the subject here. So the assets are gonna go into the trust, right? The trust is going to be set up and managed in such a way that it does not trigger the controlled foreign companies rules of the, in this case, it would typically be a beneficiary, right? In the country that would be an issue, okay? This is very important. And why is it that you can do this? You can do this because they do not own the assets yet. At some point in the future, they may own the assets. And if they do, of course, those rules will apply. But if they don't, those rules don't apply, okay? Very, very, like, it's in many cases almost the only way to plan around some of these rules, okay? So very, very useful to be able to do this. It can potentially allow infinite deferral. Now, there are some rules to sometimes try and counteract the effects of this. For instance, in the US, they have something called throwback tax on foreign non-grantor trusts, okay? I believe that's the way. And so that tries to counteract the compounding effect that can take place within the trust tax-free, all right? So anyway, those are all pieces to dive into and talk to us about. But the important part is to realize that the trust is gonna separate the ownership from the benefit. Because it's not owned, it doesn't trigger the CFC rules, all right? Which allows you to defer the income and to grow the income, to grow the wealth tax-free for an indefinite period of time. Potentially, you don't ever have to realize it when you live here. In fact, sometimes you structure it so that the trust says, hey, listen, so long as they're a resident here, there's no distributions to that person. Only when they leave and cease to become resident, then they're gonna get distributions. And so that can be done depending on like your life plan and all these sorts of things. And there's nuances to how you want to lay that out. The other thing that's really relevant here is a trust is typically a very confidential document, and so you can get a higher degree of privacy through the use of trusts than you can through any other vehicle. So anyway, this is just a very high level. Like I said, there's lots of nuances, but the important things for you to realize is you can potentially plan around CFC rules utilized by using properly structured trusts. Usually multiple beneficiaries are required. Usually there may be issues with who the settlor is that can be relevant. You may have a situation where it has to be a discretionary trust, and the trustee may need to be whoever. So anyway, hopefully that helps. I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, go and just click the notification bell. If you're interested in some assistance, then reach out to us. You can go to offshorecapitalist.com, offshorecitizen.net. You can visit clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer to book a call. If you have something you want to see, please mention it, and I'm going to see you guys on the next video.